I'd like to start with Ajay, Banga, my friend of many years, and we've worked together on a lot of significant projects in the past, but I was ecstatic when he was offered and accepted his current position, because I thought he would not be content to do quite a serviceable job with the position as it had so far been used. So let's begin with you. I predict we're going to be awestruck by the years you have as head of the World Bank, and where are you starting? What is your new playbook?
So first of all, thank you for your support when I got nominated. I won't forget the call that you and Hillary had and the support I got. I appreciate it. I will tell you that for all the good feelings, there are good days and bad days. It's a tough job. And I will say, to me, sir, the biggest challenge is that the world's issues have got intertwined. The crises have got intertwined. And when we talk about poverty alleviation and the gains we made as a world over the prior 3 to 4 decades on lifting 1 billion people out of poverty, mostly through the creation of jobs, that has got reversed during COVID. And you've got, therefore, a pandemic. You've got the existential issues of climate change, fragility, a war in Ukraine. It's all come together, and they're intertwined because you cannot solve for poverty without solving for climate in most countries around the world. You cannot solve for poverty without solving for the other issues of fragility. And so I think it's like a perfect storm. And that, I think, is our biggest challenge, and that's why you need a new playbook, because our old playbook won't work. But the playbook that remains constant is that if we remain firmly focused on providing quality of life and jobs to people, then we're doing the right thing for our world. The question is, what is quality of life? And to me, that is health and education and clean air and clean water. And jobs are not just economic growth, but dignity, to have a job. So what I'm trying to do in the playbook of the bank is to organize ourselves not just as a funding mechanism, but as a knowledge mechanism, as a success transfer mechanism, as a way of driving change in countries. And so I'm trying to create 5 verticals, and the first one is people. That's education, health, social benefit schemes, and the like. The second one is prosperity, jobs, credit for people, financial inclusion, the things that we have worked together on over the years. The third is the planet, mitigation, adaptation, water, and the like, soil degradation, biodiversity. The fourth is physical infrastructure, and the fifth, most importantly, is digital. And so when you put those 5 things together, you start from health and you go to digital, and you get people, prosperity, planet, physical infrastructure, and digital. And then I want somebody at the bottom, across the 5, who holds our feet to the fire to measure output, not input, meaning how many girls go to school, how much carbon emissions have we avoided, how much private sector dollars have we crowded in, not how many projects we financed and how many dollars went into them, because who cares about the input if we don't get the output? And the output has to be gender. The output has to be gender, it has to be youth and their jobs, it has to be carbon and the like. So I want to create our bank has to become these 5 verticals of knowledge with this hold our feet to the fire for output across the foundation. And if you can do all this well, I came across a study in the bank that you would enjoy, which said that the cost of meeting the SDGs could have been halved if we spent time in countries working on their policies, their regulations, their business environment. The estimates that come out for how tough it is to get to the SDGs do not take into account the improvement that comes from doing the right thing in creating the right environment in your country to enable, innovation and prosperity and jobs. So Those are the things I want to work on. Get these 5 things working with the bottom, focus on getting the right policies in place for countries, be a real knowledge partner. Of course, bring our money to the table, but bring our knowledge so people feel our hand on their back.
Not your grandfather's World Bank. Ruth, first, congratulations on your new role as President and Chief Investment Officer at Google. I know you are thinking about what you can do that I think Alphabet calls other bets, or maybe moonshots. But they're all potentially awe-inspiring, and to your critics, terrifying. So tell us what your big goals are.
I think one of the most awe-inspiring today is we're at this key point with artificial intelligence, which is clearly so much of the public discussion, but what does it mean for all of us? And first, thank you to you and Hillary for convening all of us to be asking these important questions and how can we move forward, how can we progress against so many of the key issues facing society. When I look at what's going on today in technology, one of the things that struck me is that the engineers at Google who were there at the inception of Google have said that today is the most exciting time in computer science, more so even than back 25 years ago. And part of it is AI is enabling us to ask the questions and deliver solutions that really go to the biggest issues in society, many of the things that Ajay talked about that have been discussed here. So as an example, in our view, we can start to democratize education and healthcare, make it available for anyone, anywhere around the globe to have the same experiences that we have here. We're looking at tools to deal with both climate change, climate adaptation, and mitigation. We're looking at the 1.3 billion people on the planet who have accessibility challenges, whether that's sight, hearing, reading, and we're able to develop tools with AI that enable them to have every experience. And just to make it really personal, at Google a number of years ago, we had a breakthrough in early detection of metastatic breast cancer. I'm a 2-time breast cancer survivor, and so I called my oncologist. But I'm grateful I was treated at Memorial Sloan Kettering here in New York, and not everyone has the same kind of care. So I called my oncologist at Sloan Kettering and I said, is this as important as I think it is? And his answer I will never forget. He said, we can never democratize healthcare without AI, because it really is augmented intelligence that enables everyone to get access to the same kind of experience I had. We asked ourselves at Google questions when we saw the tragedies of flooding. You go to the climate change point. What if we can do something with AI and predictions of water flows? It gives people more time to get out of harm's way. 250 million people every year are affected by flooding, and that number has to be growing at an exponential rate given what we have all lived through. And in fact, we can now do that. It's hours that we can provide as opposed to nothing and getting people out of harm's way. So when we look at the biggest opportunities, it's leveraging AI in ways that can address so many of the issues that have been discussed here and are being discussed amongst the SDGs, Climate Week, and more broadly. We're really excited about it. We know that that's a wonderful opportunity for us. We also know that it comes with tremendous responsibility. We've talked a lot about that. This can go wrong. We need to make sure that we're being bold on the issues that need to be addressed. That's what inspires us in doing it responsibly, working with others.
I must say, the first time I started reading about AI, these are the things I thought about. But now, everybody out on the West Coast wants to think about the potential of AI to throw every scriptwriter out of business. even maybe to have televised films with people who look like stars we know saying words they never said, written by machines, not people. Are there any downsides to AI? And if so, how should we deal with them to reap the self-evident benefits of what you talked about, which is rapid democratization of information in a hurry? Do it in a hurry.
It's the most critical question that we need to answer. How do you maximize the upside from it and deal with all of the issues that could come along with it? I think to the question of work and the future of work, which is really what you're getting at with part of your question, when you look over the history of technology, 85% of growth in employment has underneath it technological change. The question often is, how do you get from here to there? And typically, as an example, when you see the implementation of technology, what you're talking about are tasks, not jobs, but they evolve. There's no question that there's been an evolution. So for example, when ATMs came out, one of the concerns was that would destroy the banking sector and jobs for banking. What it did is it actually migrated the type of role and the service that was provided. It became operating leverage for the banks, and people who were in traditional teller roles moved to something else. One of the things that we're very focused on, I think collectively we need to be focused on, is how do you continue to provide the digital skill training, Ajay referenced as well, that positions people for the way jobs will continue to evolve. So at Google, we have something called Grow with Google, which is a digital skilling program. We do training within 3 to 6 months. It can be in cybersecurity, data analytics, it can be embedded with AI, but the goal is to work with other companies, with the private sector, to build consortia so that you have a skilling program and a certificate, and you can continue to evolve. This will continue to evolve as it has throughout history. As I said, 85% of jobs today were supported by technology growth, and 60%, frankly, of the jobs that are here today have evolved and were not here 60 years ago. And so what we need to do collectively is recognize there's an upside from technology, but make sure through training, skilling, and the efforts collectively that we are not leaving those behind. And in particular, the issue throughout time has been the most underserved are the ones that are first marginalized. And so we're really proud in our digital skilling program, the majority of people that go through it are from underserved communities, women, Black, Hispanic, veterans, and we want to make sure everybody's got access to the jobs of the future.
Albert, the whole world has recently been in the grip of an earlier period of scientific discovery with the success of the film Oppenheimer. And it's a fabulous movie, I think, and it's an unbelievable story. And it's to the credit of the people who made the movie, not an unmixed blessing. They don't pretend it was a straight line story. They don't pretend everybody was perfect. They don't pretend anything. They just tell you the story and leave you in awe. What you did, your company did, in 2020, in just 9 months, I think, going from facing a COVID epidemic that seemed to promise almost certain death to certain categories of populations all across the world, to developing a life-saving vaccine, is a story in its way just as remarkable without as much collateral damage. And first, how did you do it? And second, how did you deal with the fact that an increasing number of people in the world were not awestruck, they were in denial?
First of all, I want to say how honored I am that I'm here in this esteemed panel. And when I was growing up in Greece, my mother had a lot of ambitions about me, but even her didn't imagine that I would be interviewed by President Clinton.
Good, huh?
He's good.
I'm sure she's watching us up and says, I knew it, she will say now. As you said, we were blessed. I was blessed to lead a team that eventually had a dramatic impact in the health and dramatic impact in the economy of the world. And this was something that has not been done before. And it is not only that we're able to manufacture it, to develop the vaccine, as you said, in 9 months, usually takes 8-9 years. But also we're able to manufacture it at scale so the entire world can have it. The first year of the manufacturing, we did 3 billion doses of this vaccine when our annual productions, to give you a scale, was 200 million doses of all the vaccines until then. So from 200 to go to 3 billion for something that we never had made before in our operations was nothing then amazing, but everybody thought it was impossible. So your first question was how you did it. Let's put into context the times we were living. We thought that the world is collapsing. We thought that that's the end of the civilization. It was unthinkable moments for us. That gives to humans a drive that you can see in periods of peace or in periods of normality. And that helped, clearly. The second is that when you ask your people to do something that is seemingly impossible, always the first reaction is to use most of their energy to convince you why this is impossible. Once you made it clear that there is no other option, and they see that that will not go back, you will be amazed how much they will achieve if they used all their energy to solve the problem rather than to tell you that it is unsolvable. That married with the fact that everybody had someone who died, everybody had a grandmother that they couldn't visit, that made people work for 9 months, 24/7. And human ingenuity in science can achieve things that nobody thinks that can be done. And that's the end of the story. They made it, and we have been rewarded for it dearly because we received so much appreciation from the world, from our neighbors, that we will remember it forever.
I should point out here that you didn't say anything about, and I'm glad you didn't really, about the people who are in denial about all this and saying vaccines don't work or they're terrible. But I should remind you all that this is an old story too. I mean, when the smallpox vaccine was developed, there was a big core of denialists in the UK, what is now the UK, in England then, and a lot of the most prominent were brilliant academics, but not in the science in which they were meddling and criticizing. So this is an old story.
If I can add to what you just said, I would distinct what we call misinformation with what we call disinformation. And misinformation is wrong information that people that are spreading it, they believe in it. And either because they're afraid.
Campus that Larry and Sergey put, Stan is his name. And Stan is there to remind us every day that if we don't innovate and think about how to create great experiences for users, we too will become obsolete like a dinosaur. I think there are a couple of points to your question. One is, how do you keep people excited, focused, in awe to do the right thing? That's all about culture. I think the other point of it is a sense of urgency. And I think we all need to have a sense of urgency. To me, that's what this week is about. It's a sense of urgency around the big issues that we need to deal with. You said this, you've said this many times, that we need to make sure we're not focused on fighting the last war. We need to focus on what's next. And Larry Page has always said that, which is the issue, why do companies fail? Because they don't think about where the future is or what we can create that makes a great experience, a better future. And when I had the privilege of working with Secretary Paulson during the financial crisis, he had a phrase which is, you have to have the will and the means. And too often by the time you have the will, the political will, you no longer have the means. And I think that that's what we're living through right now, is the future will be here before we know it. We need to focus on what are the most important issues to deal with, and we better do it with a sense of urgency. And I think for all of us, when I think about the SDGs and how far behind we are in executing, it is easier to prevent than to fix. It is less costly to prevent than to fix. And we're sitting here at CGI during Climate Week and behind. And I think that coming out of this, a sense of urgency, not complacency, that these issues are here. You know, as a mother of 3 kids, they're asking, what are you doing on climate? Like, what are we each doing that makes a difference every day? Because this problem is getting too big to even resolve. So how do we have that? It starts with culture. And that dinosaur reminds us. But I think it has to be within each one of us to then say, how do you leverage whatever it is, technology, policy, convening, to be able to move forward as rapidly as possible. The future will be here faster than we know.
The dinosaurs ruled the earth for 100 million years. Anybody think we're going to make it that long? And they were felled when the meteor hit the Yucatan 66 million years ago. Of all the big extinction events in the history of our planet, it's the only one that came from outside. The others came from beneath. And it's, I have my second big dinosaur exhibit at my library in Arkansas right now. I'm fascinated by it.
You can come visit our dinosaur
But it's
stand.
worth
I'd like to see
remembering
you.
it all.
Yeah.
Ajay, I want to ask you, let's follow up on this, and then you could all comment on this. As somebody who spent most of his life in politics, I found myself doing what Harry Truman said the job of president was. He said, half the time, my job is just to convince people to do what they should have done without my asking them in the first place. And what he meant was, it seems clear this or that or the other is the right course. The problem is we humans, particularly if we're in a train, every one of us know hundreds of successful people, good people who had good lives and are doing good things. But when confronted with a totally different set of challenges, they find it difficult to adapt. And democracies find it difficult to embrace things that have more than 2 moving parts. You've got a job now, which forces you to look not just at bigger things, but better things, and figure out how to trigger, in effect, chain reactions of people doing things that require them to think of more than 1 or 2 moving parts. How do you deal with it?
I mean, the first thing you have to do is to have a very simple where you're going kind of vision. A vision that you can repeat 100,000 times without getting bored. A vision that is inspiring to the most junior employee in the bank and the most senior and people outside. And what we're defining that vision as is to eradicate poverty on a livable planet. So we have to have the livable planet is the part that I think inspires a lot of people, no matter whether you're from the global north or the global south, because air and health are fungible and they can kind of spread, as we learned in COVID. No amount of borders being shut down saves you. And that's true for climate change, and it's true for healthcare. And so there are these topics that are beginning to cut across our lives that I'm trying to bring to the forefront. And then I'm trying to recruit people in the bank to feel the pleasure and the passion of this journey and see where it could take us. And I think that's the biggest effort, and take people in the global south with us. So one of the most frightening things I see right now is the mistrust between the global south and the global north. And that mistrust has some good reasons and some not so good reasons to his misinformation and disinformation. But part of that is they feel they've not got the funding they should get. They feel they're going to pay for the life we led. They feel that they have different rules and energy than we had. They feel that we're not helping them get over a climate issue we've caused. They feel that when we have an existential threat of a war in Europe, we're able to find the money to help that, but not for them. So they've got a logic laid out on this. And that logic has got deeply ingrained in the psyche. And if you ask me, the bigger task for us, beyond convincing the individuals in the bank, of whom there are amazing people with amazing histories, who are just, they need to be liberated, that part I can deal with, I know how to. This, to me, is scarier. This requires us to really be thoughtful about how to bring our resources to bear, not just those knowledge 5 pillars, but the money to bear for the Global South. And everybody says, we in the Global North, I hate these terms, by the way, Global North and Global South, but they've kind of become monikers that are sticking. And the problem with this is that if you think through everyone saying, we don't have the financial or political headroom to be able to make these commitments come true, that's actually not the case. So to give you an example, $1.5 trillion a year goes into environmentally harmful subsidies for fuel and agriculture. 1.5 trillion across the world. The environmental harm that causes is another 6 trillion a year. 7.5 trillion. This is many zeros more than I'm used to dealing with. And yet people say there isn't money. There is money. We are making conscious choices to watch it go down the drain on one side. And we can hear the gurgling sound, and that's bad. Similarly, voluntary carbon markets that were talked up a long time ago that haven't done what they could do. The World Bank is in the midst of launching one in a few months' time for forestry. We've got 15 out of 47 countries that signed up to do a full audit end-to-end, so you're not deforesting here and reforesting there, kind of avoiding greenwashing, a full audit. I was in Indonesia looking at mangrove plantations, which suck up 5 times the carbon of a normal tropical tree. Indonesia will, through that work they're doing, 67 million tons of carbon emissions a year is what they're going to sink. If they were to monetize that through a voluntary carbon market at $10 a ton, 10, forget 50, forget 120, $10 a ton, 67 million into 10 is 670 million. The total cost of the project to get these mangroves going is 400 million. And we are generating income for so many families in the process, which is not even counted in this. There is money. We are making the wrong choices of where to put that money. And it's shocking to see this. The private sector, so everybody touts up how the private sector is just dying to put money into these countries. No, they're not. They have to get the right return. People like us have to work out what we can do to eliminate the risks that they cannot handle. There's work we can do with the private sector. There's work we can do on subsidies. There's work we can do with all these carbon markets and the like. Resources can be found. The question is, do we want to bridge this gap between the Global South and the Global North in a way that allows our children to feel the pleasure of the world we had?
Thank you. I wish we could spend another hour. I'd like to ask you what Google can do to reduce economic inequality between the global north and the south. I'd like to ask you what kind of regime we should have to properly compensate companies like yours on the front end so we can immediately transfer medical discoveries like those vaccines to people wherever they live and whatever their incomes are, and whether there is ever going to be an answer for that. But we don't have time. And because an example of the one thing you just mentioned is Ukraine and people having less sympathy if they live in the global south. That's a very dangerous thing for us to say.
Correct.
They didn't take care of my problems, so to hell with them. Because we can never do that. Correct. We are being forced to a position of equality among human beings, saying all lives matter. Whether we like it or not, we're going to have to get used to living as if that were the case, because it is.
I agree.
And I'm convinced that all three of you have many years ahead of you to make it happen, and we've been very fortunate to have you here today. Let's give them a hand. Thank you.